Most of our exhaustion does not come from living, but from explaining our lives. We try to make ourselves understandable, acceptable, and reasonable to everyone around us. Yet the more we explain, the more misunderstood we often feel. Perhaps the need to explain is not wisdom, but fear. Fear of being unseen, unloved, or judged. We like to believe that when we explain ourselves, we are simply being clear, reasonable, and mature. But if we look more closely, very gently, without judgment, we may notice something deeper happening. Much of our explaining is not about clarity at all. It is about asking to be accepted. From an early age, we are trained to justify our existence. Why did you do that? What do you mean by this? Explain yourself. And slowly, almost without noticing, we learn that being ourselves is not enough. We must also defend, package, and present ourselves in a way that others approve of. Explanation becomes a habit, and approval becomes the quiet reward we seek. Here is the strange thing. The more we explain, the less grounded we often feel. Because when your sense of self depends on being understood, you place your inner peace in the hands of others. You begin to speak not from truth, but from fear, fear of being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. And fear is never a stable place to stand. Alan Watts often reminded us that the self we try to protect is largely an idea, a story we tell about who we are. When you over-explain, you are trying to make that story convincing. You want others to agree with your version of reality so that you can relax and say, "See, I'm okay." But the moment you need permission to be okay, you have already surrendered your authority. Consider this. Do trees explain why they grow the way they do? Does the river justify its curves? Nature does not argue for its right to exist. It simply is. And paradoxically, that is why it feels so powerful. When you stop explaining, you begin to move with that same quiet certainty, not arrogance, not indifference, but groundedness. This does not mean becoming cold or refusing communication. It means noticing why you are speaking. Are you sharing or defending? Are you expressing or pleading to be accepted? When explanation comes from fear, it weakens you. When silence comes from self-trust, it strengthens you. The moment you stop asking others to validate your choices, something profound happens. Your energy returns to you. You no longer scatter yourself in arguments, justifications, and mental rehearsals. You stand where you are, calm, present, and complete. And interestingly enough, people often respect you more when you stop trying to convince them. Because confidence is not loud. It does not explain. It simply exists. Have you noticed moments in your life where you explained yourself just to feel accepted or understood? Share your experience in the comments. Your insight might help someone else recognize their own pattern. And as you reflect, ask yourself gently, what would change if I trusted myself without explanation? One of the quiet burdens we carry through life is the belief that if we explain ourselves clearly enough, everyone will finally understand us. We assume misunderstanding is a problem of language. If only we find better words, the right tone, the perfect explanation, then harmony will follow. But this is a gentle illusion. Understanding does not come from words alone. It comes from shared perception. Alan Watts often pointed out that we experience the world through very different lenses. Each person lives inside a unique universe, shaped by upbringing, culture, fears, desires, and memories. So when you speak, your words pass through another person's inner filter. They do not hear what you mean. They hear what they are prepared to hear. No amount of explanation can bridge a gap that experience has not built. This is why some people understand you instantly, while others never seem to grasp you at all. It is not because you fail to explain. It is because they are standing in a different place in life. And asking them to understand you is like asking someone who has never seen the ocean to fully comprehend the tide. You can describe it endlessly, but the knowing comes only through experience. When we insist on being understood by everyone, we quietly demand something impossible. And that demand creates frustration, disappointment, and self-doubt. We begin to think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to adjust who I am. But the truth is far kinder. Not everyone is meant to walk your inner landscape. Some people will only ever see the surface, and that is okay. There is a great freedom in realizing this. You stop exhausting yourself trying to translate your soul into a language others can digest. You begin to reserve your deeper truths for those who resonate naturally. And instead of shrinking yourself to be understood, you allow yourself to be felt by the few who can meet you where you are. Silence becomes a form of wisdom here, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of discernment. You no longer explain your intentions to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop defending your depth to people who prefer the shallow. And in doing so, you protect your energy. Understanding, when it happens naturally, feels effortless. You don't have to convince. You don't have to argue. There is a recognition, quiet, mutual, wordless. That is real connection. Everything else is negotiation. So let people misunderstand you. Let them create their own stories. You do not need to correct them. Life will speak for you more clearly than explanations ever could. And those, ye who truly belong in your journey, will recognize you without effort. Have you ever felt deeply misunderstood, no matter how much you explained yourself? Share your experience in the comments. What changed when you stopped trying to make everyone understand you? And reflect gently on this question. Who in your life understands you without explanation, and who never needed one at all? When you feel the urge to explain yourself, pause for a moment and ask, who is it that wants to be explained? This is not a question meant to confuse you, but to gently awaken you. Because the self that feels threatened by misunderstanding is not your deepest nature. It is an image, a role, a carefully constructed idea of who you think you are. Alan Watts often reminded us that the true self is not something you can fully describe. It exists before words, before labels, before stories. Yet the self we defend is usually a mental portrait, the responsible one, the good one, the misunderstood one, the successful one. When someone questions that image, we rush to explain, to protect it, to restore its position. But what we are really doing is guarding a concept. This is why explanation feels so tiring. You are not simply speaking, you are maintaining a character. And characters require constant upkeep. They need approval, confirmation, and reassurance. The true self, on the other hand, does not. It has no reputation to protect. It does not panic when misunderstood, because it knows it cannot be reduced to words anyway. Notice how peaceful you feel in moments when you are fully present, watching the sky, listening to music, laughing without self-consciousness. In those moments, you are not explaining yourself to anyone, including yourself. You simply are. That is the true self. It does not announce itself. It does not argue. It does not defend. The problem begins when we confuse the map for the territory. We believe we are the story we tell about ourselves. So when someone misreads that story, we feel personally attacked. But if you see the story for what it is, a useful but limited description, you can relax. You no longer need to correct every misunderstanding, because you are no longer trapped inside the description. This is not an invitation to become passive or indifferent. It is an invitation to live from a deeper center. Speak when there is genuine sharing. Remain silent when explanation would only reinforce a false identity. Let your actions express what words cannot. When you stop trying to explain who you are, something remarkable happens. Your presence becomes clearer. People may not understand you, but they will feel you. And feeling is always more truthful than explanation. The true self does not seek recognition. It recognizes itself in every moment. It knows that being is enough. Have you ever noticed how peaceful you feel when you stop defending who you are? Share a moment in the comments when you let go of explaining yourself and how it changed the situation. And ask yourself quietly, who am I when I no longer need to be understood? We often assume that honesty requires explanation, that truth must be spoken, clarified, and defended. But there is a deeper honesty that lives beyond words. Silence, when chosen consciously, can express more truth than the most carefully constructed explanation. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of understanding. Alan Watts frequently spoke of silence as the background of all sound. Without silence, words lose their meaning. In the same way, without silence, our expressions lose their authenticity. When you rush to explain yourself, you often speak from anxiety. But when you pause, when you allow silence to enter, you speak, if at all, from clarity. Silence is honest because it does not pretend. It does not embellish. It does not try to persuade. When you choose silence instead of explanation, you are acknowledging something simple and powerful. Not everything needs to be said, and not everyone needs an answer. This realization alone can free you from countless unnecessary conversations. Think about how often explanations are given, not because they are needed, but because we are uncomfortable with the space that silence creates. Silence can feel threatening. It invites reflection, uncertainty, and presence. Yet, it is precisely this space that allows truth to breathe. Words rush in to control meaning. Silence allows meaning to emerge. When you stop explaining, you also stop arguing with other people's interpretations of you. You allow them to have their thoughts without interference. This does not mean agreement, it means trust. Trust that your life will communicate its own truth over time. Actions, consistency, and presence speak far louder than verbal defense. Silence also returns dignity to communication. Over-explaining can sound like pleading, even when it is not intended that way. Silence, however, carries weight. It signals that you are not desperate to be seen a certain way. You are at ease with not being fully known, and this ease itself becomes magnetic. There is also a spiritual dimension to silence. In deep moments of awareness, words fall away naturally. You do not need to explain joy when you feel it. You do not need to justify peace when you inhabit it. Silence becomes the most accurate language of being. This does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means choosing your words with intention rather than reflex. Speak when it adds clarity. Remain silent when explanation would only dilute truth. In that balance, you reclaim your energy and your authenticity. Have you ever noticed a moment when silence said more than words ever could? Share that experience in the comments and reflect on this gently. Where in your life could silence bring more honesty than explanation? There is a subtle but powerful difference between speaking from presence and speaking from insecurity. When you are fully present, your words are few, natural, and alive. When you are uncertain, words multiply. Over-explaining is often not a sign of clarity. It is a sign that presence has been replaced by anxiety. Alan Watts once suggested that real confidence is not something you announce. It is something that is felt. Presence does not need to justify itself. It does not rush to fill the space. It allows silence to exist without discomfort. Over-explaining, on the other hand, feels like leaning forward too far, trying to hold the listener's attention by force rather than by being. When you explain too much, you unconsciously communicate doubt. You signal that you are unsure whether your position can stand on its own. The irony is that the more you try to convince others, the less convincing you become. Not because your ideas lack value, but because your energy is scattered. Presence is focused. Over-explanation diffuses it. Think of someone who speaks calmly and directly. They say what needs to be said, and stop. Their words land. Compare this with someone who keeps adding clarifications, defenses, and justifications. The message becomes muddy. The listener stops listening. Presence has left the room. This happens because over-explaining pulls you out of the moment and into the mind. You begin predicting reactions, anticipating objections, and adjusting yourself in real time. You are no longer with the person, you are performing for them. And performance, no matter how polished, lacks the quiet authority of authenticity. Presence is powerful because it rests in self-trust. When you trust yourself, you don't rush. You don't panic when someone disagrees. You don't feel the need to rescue your image. You allow your words to stand, just as you allow yourself to stand. There is also a deep respect in presence. When you stop over-explaining, you trust the listener's intelligence. You allow them to meet you halfway. Communication becomes a shared space rather than a one-sided effort to control perception. To cultivate presence, notice your impulses. When you feel the urge to keep talking, pause. Ask yourself, am I adding clarity or am I seeking reassurance? Often, stopping is more powerful than continuing. Often, what is left unsaid carries the greatest weight. Presence is not loud. It does not push. It does not beg to be believed. It simply is. And in that stillness, it speaks louder than explanation ever could. Have you ever noticed how people listen differently when you speak less but with confidence? Share your experience in the comments and reflect on this question. What would change in your life if you trusted your presence more than your explanations? One of the most liberating realizations in life is understanding that people usually judge before you ever open your mouth. Long before your explanation begins, a conclusion has already formed. This may sound unsettling at first, but it carries a deep freedom, because if judgment comes first, then explanation was never the solution. We like to believe that misunderstandings happen because we didn't explain ourselves well enough. So we try again, more words, more detail, more effort. But what we are often facing is not confusion, it is interpretation. People see the world through their own assumptions, wounds, beliefs, and expectations. Your explanation enters after that filter has already shaped meaning. Alan Watts often spoke about how the mind creates categories instantly. The moment someone meets you, hears your tone, or notices your behavior, the mind labels friendly or straw, NGE, confident or insecure, right or wrong. These labels arise automatically without conscious intention, and once formed, they resist change. No amount of explanation can easily undo them. This is why over-explaining feels so frustrating. You sense that no matter how carefully you speak, the listener is not really hearing you. They are responding to their own inner narrative. And when you realize this, you can finally stop blaming yourself. You were never failing at communication. You were trying to reverse a process that had already happened. Here is where freedom enters. When you accept that judgment precedes explanation, you stop performing. You stop trying to manage other people's perceptions. You understand that their opinions belong to them, not to you. And in that understanding, a great weight lifts. This does not mean becoming indifferent or unkind. It means being realistic. You speak when you feel moved to share, not when you feel compelled to defend. You explain when there is openness, not when there is resistance. You learn to sense the difference, and that sensitivity is wisdom. There is also a quiet compassion that arises here. When you realize others judge quickly, you also realize you do the same. And instead of condemning this, you see it as part of being human. Minds seek certainty. Labels provide comfort. Understanding this allows you to move through life with less conflict and more ease. When you stop trying to explain yourself to those who have already decided who you are, you reclaim your energy. You redirect it toward living rather than proving. And life itself becomes your explanation, unfolding slowly, honestly, beyond argument. Have you ever noticed that someone had already made up their mind about you before you spoke? Share your experience in the comments and reflect on this gently. What would change if you stopped explaining yourself to PO who are not listening? One of the most exhausting habits of the mind is the need to correct misunderstanding. When someone sees you the wrong way, something inside tightens. You feel an urge to clarify, to fix their perception, to set the record straight. It feels necessary, almost moral. But this urge, when examined closely, is not about truth. It is about attachment. Alan Watts often spoke of freedom as the ability to let things be what they are. And that includes letting other people be wrong about you. Wrong, not in a factual sense, but in the sense that their version of you does not match your inner experience. The moment you demand that others see you correctly, you hand them power over your peace. Why does it bother us so much when someone misunderstands us? Because we identify with the image they hold. We believe that their misunderstanding threatens who we are. But the truth is simpler and kinder. Their perception of you is not you. It is a thought happening in their mind. And thoughts, like clouds, pass. When you try to correct every misunderstanding, you live reactively. Your energy moves outward, chasing approval, repairing images, defending identities. But when you let others be wrong, your energy returns inward. You stand where you are. You breathe. You remember that your reality does not depend on consensus. There is also a deep humility in allowing others their interpretations. You recognize that you too misunderstand people. You too create incomplete stories. And instead of trying to control perception, you allow life to reveal itself over time. Consistency, presence, and integrity communicate far more truth than correction ever could. Letting others be wrong does not mean agreeing with falsehood. It means choosing peace over persuasion. It means knowing when explanation would serve clarity and when it would only serve ego. This discernment is a mark of inner maturity. Paradoxically, when you stop correcting others, you often become clearer. Your actions align, your words simplify, and peace. People who are open will adjust their understanding naturally, without effort. Those who are not open were never listening anyway. Freedom is not being understood by everyone. Freedom is no longer needing to be. And in that freedom, you discover something extraordinary. Your life becomes lighter, quieter, and more honest. Have you ever experienced relief when you stopped correcting someone's misunderstanding of you? Share that moment in the comments. And reflect on this question: who would you become if you no longer needed to be seen correctly by everyone? At the heart of the need to explain yourself lies a simple question: do I trust myself? Not in a loud or defensive way, but quietly, deeply. When self-trust is missing, we look outward for confirmation. We explain our choices so others will reassure us. We defend our feelings so they will feel legitimate. Validation becomes the substitute for inner certainty. Alan Watts often pointed out that the mind seeks security in symbols, titles, opinions, approval. But true security does not come from being agreed with. It comes from knowing, without argument, that your experience is real because you are experiencing it. When you trust yourself at this level, the need for explanation dissolves naturally. Self-trust does not mean believing you are always right. It means accepting that your perspective is valid, even when it is incomplete. You can be open to learning without being dependent on approval. You can listen without surrendering your center. This is a subtle but profound shift, from needing permission to simply being present. When you rely on validation, peace is fragile. It rises when you are praised and collapses when you are questioned. You live on an emotional pendulum, swinging between confidence and doubt. But when peace is rooted in self-trust, it becomes steady. Opinions may come and go, but your inner ground remains. This is why people who trust themselves speak calmly. They don't rush. They don't over-explain. They don't panic when misunderstood. Their silence feels safe because it is not empty. It is anchored. You can sense it. And others feel it too. Self-trust also allows you to be misunderstood without bitterness. You no longer need to correct the world to feel whole. You allow life to unfold, knowing that clarity will emerge in its own time. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. Your worth was never dependent on explanation. The paradox is that when you stop seeking validation, you often receive more respect. Not because you demand it, but because you embody wholeness. And wholeness needs no defense. Inner peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in life. Trust in the unfolding moment. Have you noticed moments when trusting yourself brought more peace than being understood? Share your experience in the comments and sit with this question gently. What would your life feel like if you no longer needed validation to be at peace?